Now, we've all been there when we walk into work on a Monday morning. You go to the kitchen, there's a coworker there, and then you ask, how's your weekend been? And they give a very lackluster, boring response, right? Just walking the dog, just stayed on the couch, doom scrolled, slept. Really boring, right? You nod, they nod, you go, they go, and then you go, well, it was a great chat, and then you just walk off and then continue your work, starting off your Monday morning with really droll stuff. Most people think that the conversation was boring because they themselves are boring, or that the person they're talking to is boring. But it's not the fact that either of you are actually boring, because no one drove the conversation outside of that boring state. You can physically drive anywhere you want, but there is scenes of beauty in places. There's things that are really curious to see, but people just didn't choose to go there, right? You and the person you're talking to didn't decide to take it into that area. Probably because it feels unfamiliar, probably because it feels unsolicited. But you can just go, hey, you know what? Let's just take a scenic route. And that's what I'll be talking about today. The issue is most people wait until the other person says something interesting before they start to drive this conversation in a more interesting manner, right? They start to engage a lot more only when they were prompted. But actually, that's backwards. Rather than waiting for an interesting conversation to land on you, there's a way for you to create an interesting conversation at will. So if you ask just surface level questions, you're probably going to get surface level answers, and then find as to why is this person not, digging deeper into their hobbies or their interests, or talking about how they feel about doing a certain thing, or sharing about an experience that may be similar to you, in which then the conversation starts to get a lot more interesting. But the problem is they were never prompted to do so, right? They never felt safe sharing that. That's the problem. And you probably have felt the same. When someone asks you surface level questions, you don't feel the need or the urge to dig deeper into it. It feels like the person didn't ask for that, right? Because they can say like, oh, what'd you do on the weekend? And then in your mind, you're just saying, oh, well, it was pretty boring. I didn't really do much. I just read, right? It doesn't occur to you to, per se, talk about specifically what book you read, why you're interested in that genre, is because you don't know if the person is interested in that at all. And you're just worried that you will drag a conversation on a topic that the person might not care about. I mean, it could be the case that the person is just asking just to be polite, right? They're just asking how your weekend was just to be polite rather than actual conversation. Even though in most cases, that's not what I find. But there's not enough incentive given to you to talking about things that are more interesting. Now, I used to think that having interesting conversations is always about having interesting things to directly say to the other person, unprompted, just, talking my way into being more charismatic or making the person and myself feel good. Now, what actually moved the needle in having a much more interesting conversation and having deeper connections with people was actually asking certain kinds of questions. It was asking questions to which I generally wanted to know the answer to. Even when the topic itself, the general topic that we're talking about, someone doing something on the weekend, was a boring topic, or even if it's about the weather, right? Talking about the weather is a terrible topic in general, but you can pivot it into a more interesting conversation just by asking the right kind of question, right? And it's not fake curiosity. It's not pretending. It's a specific question that is asking more about the other person, right? Knowing more about the other person. So someone tells you in the weekend they watched a TV show. They were just watching TV. And you go, oh, nice. And that's it, right? There's no material to continue going forward. Here's what I would recommend is asking, what show? Now, I don't actually watch much TV, but think about the answer that someone could potentially give. It could be a criminal show. It could be a horror TV show. It could be a medieval fantasy show. And you might not know the show that they say because they will just name the title of it. And then you say, I've never heard about that show. What's it about? And then from there, they can tell you about the show and tell you what they enjoy about it. Or at the very least, you could ask them about that as well. And then you can even further delve deeper and go, so what about the show do you enjoy? And all these questions literally just give them the permission to open up more. It tells them the message that, hey, I want to know more about you, and I'm actually genuinely curious about you and why you're interested in certain things. And now you're digging deeper into a hobby that they do that they don't normally get permission to talk about, right? And now they have to start to think, and they start to think about why they enjoy the show. They probably start to learn more things about themselves, and then they share that with you. And then you can see that the picture that is that person starts to become more elaborate, starts to become less gray or black and white. They start to be more colorful because they're starting to get this personality, right? You're starting to see that they like crime and they like it for these kinds of reasons. They like doing these kinds of hobbies for these kinds of reasons. They start to flesh out a little bit more and in turn become more interesting. And from there, as they're talking about their experiences, you can also draw parallel experiences with you and share the same thing with the other person. So you both simultaneously become much more interesting to each other, rather than just the normal platitude, weekend was good, how was yours, it was good, and that's it. Now, sometimes people really think that they're boring and say they really didn't do much at all. They just had, maybe, for example, they had family commitments, they didn't really engage in much hobbies because they didn't have time, and they just went to the gym and that was it. Now you're going to get those conversations. Now here's a question that I use in those situations. It's, if you had a 4-hour time block and you could do whatever you want, what would you choose? And that would always get the person thinking in a way that they never thought before, because they never really had the luxury to do so. But they would think about the things that they would want to do. And then when they share that, now you get more insight about them, right? And then you can ask further, like, oh, why would you pick that? And this in turn does the same effect as those other questions that I said before. It fleshes the person out a bit more. It colors the canvas a bit more. Now, people are always used to surface level questions. How was your weekend? Talking about dogs, talking about family. These are things that people talk about all the time. So they're in default mode when you talk to them like that. They almost have a pre-canned set of responses that are already ready to go by the time they walk into the office. What you want to do is you want to shift them out of that mode into a more authentic version of themselves. A mode that really exposes much more than just the tip of the iceberg. That is this character, right? That is this person. When you ask the slightly deeper question, the why are you interested in that, or what specific show did you watch, that actually gives them permission to talk more about themselves. And they actually really want to share that. People love talking about the things that they're interested in. And as they reveal more interesting things about them, you become more interested in them. And then you can also share about interesting experiences you had. And then you have this really good back and forth dynamic. You're really gaining a lot about this other person, and the other person is gaining a lot from you. People want that. And it's not that you're being invasive. They finally have the permission to be more interesting. Another example could be that you're waiting in line for a coffee, right? And there's a person and you lock eyes for a bit longer than usual. And it might feel a bit awkward not to say anything. And you can ask a very basic, canned response question, such as, what do you do for work? And they can say, oh, I'm a receptionist. And that's all they'll give you because they're still in the pre-canned mode. And then you can ask them this kind of question that will set it off a little bit. It's like, what do you enjoy about being a receptionist? And, he or she will give a response to say, I like the team. I like the routine. I like the fact that I get to converse with a lot of people. They'll give those kinds of responses, but this starts to flesh out what they enjoy, what they value. And it feels like a very direct question. It almost feels like it's invasive, but it's actually a question people love to answer. And it always leads somewhere. It always leads to more interesting things about this person. This person is not just a receptionist. This is Sarah, and this is what she likes in life. And then you can start throwing conversation threads to her, and she can start throwing them back. Experiences that she had, experiences you had, and then off to the races you go. Now, sometimes even when you do prompt this, they won't really give you much at all. It'll be very much like a one word or one phrase kind of response. They could be tired, they could be distracted, they could just simply not be in the mood, and that's all right. That's not a failure, it's just that currently it's not a good time. And don't force it, you can just let it breathe. And in that state, you can just move on, right? You can just move on from the conversation and get back to some of the things that you want to do, or another person that you may want to have a conversation with. The main thing is that this is a tool to really open up the conversation and getting better at letting the other person open up more to have a more interesting exchange. However, sometimes the person's not interested in the exchange. It isn't necessarily to get everyone to open up. Now, I'm not normally a talker. I'm actually really comfortable with silence, but I use those kinds of questions at work, with friends, even friends that I'm really, really close with. And the fascinating thing is I find out so much more about them that I never knew in years because I just never gave them permission to open up like that. This style of questioning always leads somewhere. It always starts up the car when you feel like it's stalled. I didn't become a different person. I just stopped waiting for the conversation to get interesting from the person I'm talking to actively trying to drive the interest myself. But what about you guys? What have you done to make conversations more interesting? Share them in the comments below. If you like that kind of content, give it a like and subscribe, and I'll see you all in the next one.